uh, the director said, we are very fortunate that we have amongst us today Professor Pankaj Chandra. And Professor, I'm supposed to introduce Professor Pankaj Chandra. So he was the director of Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. So once you say that he was the director, I don't have to say that he has published a lot, he has taught so many years. You know, those things all go into that bundle when you become a director. You have already achieved all those, and which is the case. He is actually a BTech, so not very different from people, the ilk that we have here. He is a BTech from BHU, and then he did PhD from Wharton School. So, you know, the kind of combinations that our students also seek, he's the same kind. So it's one amongst us, I would say similar. After that, he has been to many universities, McGill, University of Geneva, Wharton School, Cornell, largely he was at Ahmedabad before moving to Bangalore. So he was a faculty at Ahmedabad, and he is of course an expert in manufacturing management, supply chain coordination, building technological capabilities, and the most importantly, higher education policy. And that is where he has actually been on the government committees. He was a member of the SPAL committee and many other committees. So not only he has been a professor and a director, but he has actually contributed a lot to the thinking in the national level thinking in higher education policy. And of course, he has edited some books and so on. So I will not go into those details. I simply invite him and let him speak. Yeah, thank you.
Well, good evening. Thank you very much, Professor Sharma, Professor Shevgaonkar, Ambuj. Very kind of you to invite me to share some thoughts that are intriguing me. I don't claim to be an expert in this, but these are questions that I think are facing the society in a very big way, and many people are thinking about it. I don't have a story to tell about myself, but I have a story to tell about many others. And I hope you will judge this talk by the kind of stories that I have chosen to present before you. So here's the plan. I want to talk about a set of people, organizations, who stand as interesting set of people who created value by doing things very differently. At times when the norm was to do exactly how the society was moving. Sometimes they produce things which are very routine and very simple through people who were very unsophisticated and very ordinary. But at the end they created something very extraordinary. And that's what I would like to share with you. And then at the end I'll try to tie these stories together to see what is it that's common amongst them. So that's one. I must also get the mundane out. You know, just when I landed, I got a phone call from somebody who said that, they've gotten an interview call from IIM Ahmedabad and IIM Bangalore. How should they prepare? So I thought for a while, and then I narrated a story, and I want to maybe start. This is for the aspiring students. Narrate a story to you. This is 1994. I was attending a conference in Singapore, and a colleague of mine from IIM Ahmedabad was also with me. We went to an alumni gathering of IIM Ahmedabad, and just before that, I had been traveling for 3 weeks. So here is a person, I started to talk, an alumnus, who said that I have spent my last 10 years in West Africa. And my eyes perked up because these last 3 weeks I was in Senegal. And I really enjoyed my stay in West Africa, in Mauritania, Senegal. I was in Dakar. And for no other reason but for the fact that there was an interesting language being spoken there. The food was great. The music was just fabulous. And my enthusiasm was so great in meeting this person who's worked there for 10 years. I thought, here's a person who's going to tell me great stories. And mind you, this is an IIM Ahmedabad MBA. and lo and behold, he punctures my balloon by just saying, you know, when I asked him, so what, you must have done this, you must have done that. And he says, no, you know, I just sold chemicals. So beware. I mean, this is for the students. Beware. Be careful that you don't become, within quotes, standard, irrespective. And I think the engineers and the managers, and I'm both of them, so I can afford to say it, have a great propensity to become standard. So here is what I'd like to tell you. These are few stories I'm very fond of. And I'm very fond of because many of them have created value by being very different. And they're different because they lie at where the axis of conscience crosses the axis of creativity and innovation. This is their positioning of some of them, I wouldn't say all of them, and that makes them, these stories, extremely exciting. So let me take you through these 5 stories, 4 or 5, and then talk to you about what they tell us. So first is Amul, and I'm sure all of you have heard of them. Amul started in 1946, Khera District Milk Union. Today, it's interesting because it comprises of a very unique structure which was never found anywhere in the world until then. You have large number of farmers, village collection centers, plants that process them, and then you have a distribution and marketing arm which is independent of the producer, which was never done in cooperatives, which is of course never done in any integrated organization that we see in our society, even often at times even today. Ending this fiscal year, there were 17 plants. Imagine 3.2 million farmers pouring 1 and 2 liters of milk, but more importantly, they pour milk in one window. Those of you from Gujarat or others who may have visited these facilities, they pour milk in one window, walk over to another window and pick up their payment and walk away. When the corporate world around the globe pays its suppliers with a lag of at least 60 days. And you have to ask this question, why are they doing it and how are they able to do it? Several categories of products, about $2 billion worth of turnover. But more interestingly, this entire endeavor of white revolution made India the largest milk producer in 1997. And this is when in 1946 nobody was willing to sell us milk and we got powder milk from New Zealand. The question is, what made this happen? I think of course people thought very differently in how do you organize these very distributed people. This is, by the way, a very difficult product domain. At times more difficult than an automobile. I'm sorry to say this in an engineering school, but simply because it has different seasons, the variability is very high. In winter, there's flush season, you have excess milk, and in summer, you have shortage of milk. And the network gets broken very rapidly. The incentives to seek rent and the network breaks out. People go out of the network. So you have to hold them up in some ways so that you're able to capture the interest of large number of farmers who pour 1 and 2 liters of milk in the morning and 1 or 2 liters of milk in the evening. But really, the thing that turned around this organization, in addition to its organization structure, was a technological innovation. Milk until then could be brought in powder form only if it was cow's milk. And Amul, along with CFTRI, worked to develop a process technology that allowed buffalo milk to be made into a powder. Now, they had two big advantages. One, there was an abundance of buffalo in India as opposed to cow. So suddenly, the source enlarged. And second, and this is more important, in winter when you had excess milk, since you could not store, milk had to be thrown away or sold at dirt prices where the returns to the farmers were very minimal. But here was a case where you could convert it in powder, store it, and in summer, lean season, you could reconvert it back into liquid milk. And powder milk conversion, buffalo milk conversion to powder was not an easy task in 1956. But this was a technological revolution that completely changed the game for India in this particular domain. The second story for me is a company called PBW, Patel Brass Works. Does anybody here know of this one? It's a small company. It's actually an upper end, small and lower end mid-sized company out of Rajkot, who make bearings and bushings, and they started by doing it for low speed diesel engines, and subsequently have now developed proprietary technology, because here's a small company that would get orders of varying sizes and varying dimensions. So which means that they had to keep inventory of large number of different size pipes. But they developed a very proprietary technology to essentially kind of enlarge the dimensions of standard size pipe without changing the metallurgical properties, and at the same point of time meeting the requirements of the market. But that's not really where their interesting story lies. So Miba, by the way, is a company from Austria that makes machines that produce bearings. So here is a company that wanted to buy a Miba machine. So they wrote to Miba in Austria and they ignored them. They said, who is this small company out of God knows where in India wanting to purchase a machine? They won't be able to pay them back. So they just ignored. For 5 years they just ignored them. And one day, here is a young man who just got onto a plane, went to Austria, got one of the engineers to come back to their plant, look at the process, and lo and behold, of course, they had done something very interesting, very innovative, and Miba not only sold the machine, but today, Miba's machines, bearings are actually made by PBW. But that's not, once again, where this real story of these guys lie in terms of how they thought differently. So one day, PBW gets a phone call, and this is a story a few years ago, where somebody says, my ship is stuck in Atlantic. My compressor has broken down. Can you make me a bearing? And here's this guy. They say, well, they gave the specification of the compressor, everything. Coincident also played a role here. They said, we don't have a compressor of that particular kind. So they went up to Alang and found, Alang is the shipbreaking yard in Gujarat, and they found, fortunately, just coincidence, they found a compressor. They pulled out the bearing, brought it, replicated it in 48 hours, shipped it. 5 years from now, it's a 100 crore business, supplying in 24 hours through Federal Express these bearings that are sent to ships that are stuck globally on high seas. This is IT in manufacturing, if you may, in the spirit of it, where you don't need the roads. And I would like to ask this question, who needs roads in this particular case? So it's a company which has turned things overhead. Of course, now it doesn't go to Alang each time it gets an order. It has learned, it has developed a CAD library of its own of all kinds of compressors in the world, and does business very differently. Here's a third example, and once again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. This is an initiative of ISKCON in Bangalore to provide midday meals. Now they are in 9 states of the country. And the current scale from Bangalore is 1.8 lakh children at 7.62 rupees a meal, and very relatively as nutritious a meal as you can get for that money or even more. Let me show you a few pictures of this for those of you who may not have. Here's of course from one of the brochures. This is food given in rural Karnataka. This is largely a collection of what their kitchen looks like, and I want to show you a little bit more of this. This is the other earlier picture was about 5 years old from the brochure. This is most recent from their website. The kitchen, by the way, was headed by somebody who is a PhD from Indian Institute of Science. And the most interesting issue associated with this came when they wanted to scale. And so the issue facing them is as follows. So from 1.8 lakhs at lunchtime, how do you go to 3 lakhs at the same cost? By the way, this 7.62 rupees was 6 rupees almost 11 years ago. So they've beaten inflation hands down on this. And the question becomes, how have they done this? What is it in their thinking that allows them to really scale up from serving 2 schools to begin with, and now hundreds of schools and lakhs of kids. And the issue is very interesting. The scale, how do you replicate a kitchen that was doing very well into many kitchens all over the country now, which have to do equally well? Is there something in the structure of the kitchen that allows you to do that? Second, are there operational systems and technology that you could use to really keep this cost down? How do you keep the cost down when the cost of your raw material is growing very rapidly? By the way, out of that to 7.62 rupees as the cost, 2.4 is the subsidy from the government, and the rest is a contribution from the larger society. So when the costs are going up, how do you manage to keep your cost of raw material, cost of labor, everything going up? How do you manage to keep the cost of output down? And there are many examples, I invite you to actually look at them, but there's one particular one which really stands out in my own mind, and it would be probably a piece of cake for all of you, but when it comes to scaling, that's an interesting way to look at doing things differently. So they would make cook rice in vats with hot water, and it would take about 23 to 24 minutes to do so. And then, of course, and ex post everything looks, why didn't they do it to begin with? They created a double layered vat and ran hot water around it and reduced the time of cooking from all the theories that you learn are very much applicable there. And they reduced the time to some 17 minutes or 16 minutes. And then they started passing steam in those double layered vats, and that reduced it further to about 12 minutes. Now imagine, you've actually doubled your capacity at no cost. So you're able to do now more with exactly same amount of resources. And most recent innovation is that they're testing is new set of material for the cooking vats, which will further reduce it to 6 minutes or so. So here is a journey. How come a temple of this particular kind gets involved into distributing food, but deploys high tech? I mean, that's a very interesting combination of, I mean, normally low cost is associated with, in our country, with very low tech. But that's not what you see in any one of these kind of cases. The next example, okay, let me just run this, is from Israel. And this just captured my imagination, and hence I'm bringing it here for you. But this is a company that just got FDA approval for its medical diagnostic device. It's a drug delivery device, if you may. Oops. So I've just pulled this promotional video out, which will tell you what it does. I don't know if you can hear, but if you can't, I'll just tell you what it's doing. I'm sorry, it's not audible to you, but okay, thanks. Doesn't go there? Sorry? Okay, let me try. Okay, let me just hold it for a minute. This is a device to push a drug in through the lung stream, and it's a shape as big as a credit card. I mean, normally we have an inhaler that we normally use, which is far more cumbersome, and you have to kind of play with it because and pump it a little bit for the drug to go into your lung stream. This is a device that has been tested, and I'll show you how it works, but it just pushes a powder into the lung stream, and which gets into your bloodstream that much more rapidly as opposed to a pill. So they're now testing whether this could replace a pill or an injection. And it got the FDA approval for pushing the powder for asthma. But anyway, if I can't show you, it's on the website, and you're interested, you could take a look at it. So it's saying, I mean, can you translate, not use the pill which goes through the entire body system to before it gets into the bloodstream, or an injection. So this is a dry powder inhaler solution. This is as big as it may be. It says our lungs provide a large absorptive surface area, and consequently using this inhaler in this manner is very valuable. So the drug powder is on this orange yellow patch. So it's few cents, and it's seen as a disposable unit. So it's a very cheap and effective way of delivering drugs, which of course is being tested for a variety of different kinds of medicine. It's a single dose delivery, few cents in cost. But more interestingly, I think it's really a mashup technology of work that was done in drug atomizers by people who were involved in jet engines to create this miniature engine kind of a device that pushes the drug out of its bag, and more interestingly, it's in the shape of a credit card. And the question that ran through my own mind was, what is the background of people and the environment that can do this? What is the education that allows somebody to develop a product of this particular kind and dream up an application of this nature? What is the enabling environment that allows someone to think of a product of this kind? If it happens, and imagine if it works at the end where it starts to deliver even insulin, then we have a very powerful mechanism, whether this form or some other way of taking insulin. I think that would be the real breakthrough in an area of this kind. We also know this history. Post World War II, Japan was completely kind of disenfranchised as far as armament industry was concerned by US, and that led to a very interesting development in the auto sector. But because large number of engineers, technologies flew into this other domain. But more interestingly, at that point of time, the cost of capital was very high in Japan. Holding inventory became very expensive. Land was at phenomenal shortage, so warehousing was very difficult to do. So here are a set of constraints that economy was kind of facing: narrow roads, skills, a very limited skills of engineering, but a very high level of engineering. But the pool of people coming out from most of the institutions were non-engineers, and the science, large number of science majors, and how do you prepare them to kind of get, and actually this led to a redesign in the way operational system would work. And if you look at the history of what is the technology that drove this constraint to almost non-existence, you will see that it were these soft constraints that were preventing Japan from becoming really a very powerful technology developer and a seller of cars. Manufacturer it was, and that turned out to be actually JIT. The driver of JIT was really, in quite some ways, this intense cost pressure and the pressure on the land to be able to not hold inventories. And consequently, you had to devise. So you can while the rest of the world was optimizing those constraints to get the best inventory levels in the warehouse, best inventory levels on the shop floor, here was a way of thinking which says, well, I want to break those constraints. Let me not have inventory at all. Let me bring in all that is needed at a given point of time. Now, it was easily said than done. And so you had to create those linkages, those structures very differently to be able to provide the advantage that good, well-designed cars needed in order to become commercially competitive globally. So here are some very different kind of stories, and I want to end this part by showing you another one. And so here's actually, I saw a stall in Ahmedabad that was selling kites, and the stall looked something like this. I mean, those triangular kites are the one that we typically make. And here was a young man who was selling these kites, and there were various different kinds of kites there. This is the one, the triangular one that I was used to, but I saw some other type of kites too. And I asked him, oh, looks like the tastes have changed in Ahmedabad. So he said, no, these are from China. And so I said, oh, foolish as I was, I said, oh, okay, so these wouldn't be selling. So no, this is the best-selling kite. And then the person went ahead and showed me some other kites, which were actually once again selling much, much better at a given point of time than our regular triangular type of kite. So I asked him, so what are you doing? Have you done anything to meet them? I was really exasperated that here is, even kites are being kind of coming from China, and I was always curious, what is it that that our kite sellers and kite producers are doing in order to counter this reaction? One is, of course, make money by trading. So it doesn't matter who produces, so long as I trade. So then this young man said, no, it's not too bad. These guys were selling very well a year or two ago, but look, we've also started to make some things which are different. Now, I don't know which flies better or which looks better, that's in the eye of the beholder. And then he showed me something else. And he says, look at the kite at the back. That's something which we've made this year. I said, okay. And then I saw this in the stall. Now, I was familiar with the wooden ones, right? And I said, oh, so what about this? Have these also come from China? He said, yes, these have also come from China. They're plastic molded, they're low cost, they've all come from China. And he said, yeah, a year ago, this was also, and by the way, I mean, my conversation was happening at one point of time, but he was narrating a story to me which spanned a few years. And he was telling me, oh yeah, so we made this first, and then they got this, and we tried this one out. And last year, this stuff was coming. So I said, how have you, now I was a little bit emboldened, I said, how have you managed to kind of change this? Did you bring back the wooden one? Did you do something to the wooden one? So he said, no, I could not do something to the wooden one, but I did this. And he showed me this stuff here. This is actually a motorized Cherokee. And you see that red, let me see if I can get my cursor back. You see this small red button here. Actually, that's where you kind of press and the reel comes. So I said, oh, this is impressive. How did you do it? He said, well, I knew I had to fight it out. And by the way, this gentleman here is no engineer. This guy is probably class 10 passed, runs his father's business. During Sankranti time, he does this. During Diwali time, he does something else. During his family and during Holi, they make colors and all kinds of stuff. So I said, so what did you do? He said, I got this idea, I have to do something else, but I knew that this wooden one won't work. I have to go 2 steps ahead of them. But he said, I didn't know. So he said, I went to LD College of Engineering in Ahmedabad, and I talked to some people there, and they led me to someone else, and there was a workshop where this guy said, well, let's try putting a motor. And then I went to NID, and I got them to design this beautiful looking nice product. I thought this was doing things very differently. And the question then comes, let me close this one down for a minute. The question then arises, what have all these stories and examples have in common? And in my mind, all of them have dared to do things differently. Most importantly, dared to do things differently at a time when everybody was wanting them to say yes. and they said no. And that is really what these stories are about, where they're able to walk back and forth between the past and the future, and create a unique opportunity, a unique challenge, a unique way of thinking for them.